Welcome everybody again, and I'm now going to share my screen in the usual way. We are at the beginning, and as usual, we simply say on the title page that it's the June 2024 bulletin that we're going to be looking through. And as usual, here is a picture of the front cover, and on the right you can see my email address should you wish to write to me about any aspect of these follow-ups or indeed anything else. If you want to look at previous follow-ups, you can search for the British Sundial Society YouTube, and that will take you to the relevant channel where you can see all 4 previous recordings and shortly the recording of this follow-up. Alternatively, you can go there more directly by copying youtube.com/@the-BSS. That's what gets you there immediately. As usual, here is the somewhat skeletal version of the title of the list of contents, and I'm not going to be talking about the editorial at the top or the BSS report and accounts at the bottom, but everything else is up for people to talk about as we go through. Of this list, the lead article, which I've just highlighted, is of particular note, and I'm hoping in a moment that John Davis will be able to make some introductory words about it, and then we'll go through the other articles. You can certainly talk about this at this stage, the double horizontal sundial, but at the end, the other author, Sobolov Burovchenko, is going to come in, and he will be doing the postscript this time, and in particular, he will be saying words about this the sundial, the reproduction of the double horizontal sundial, and much more about the Master Terebrus organization, which he is very much involved with. And I think that's all I have to say for the moment. So I'll now unshare my screen if I can find the right thing to press.
Okay, thank you. And so we are switching to the issue itself.
Right, if you can open the page. The front cover, incidentally, is of enormous interest, but there is no article about that, at least not just yet. So if you go into the next page, we'll see the inside front cover and the editorial, which we can ignore. And now we have the article about the double horizontal sundial. This is an absolutely splendid article, and I hope, John Davis, are you there? So you can tell us.
I am indeed.
Right, well, over to you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, good. Well, this story started 12 years ago, so it's been a long time in gestation. And it started when someone tried to steal a very old dial plate from the pedestal that you see in the picture, which is at Hartlebury Castle. Luckily, they failed to steal it, and afterwards, the people at the castle just took the plate indoors for safekeeping, but they didn't really do very much more at that stage. But 3 years later, David Bryden, who many of you will know, I think, was doing some work on the archives at the castle, and he came across this dial plate, and he recognised that it was a double horizontal dial, which was obviously quite rare. And he knew that there was a monograph that myself and Michael Lown had published, but that this dial wasn't in there. So he contacted me, and I was very excited and immediately recorded it, wrote down all the details. But not very much more happened at that stage. I would have liked to have made a replica myself, but I just physically couldn't do that at that time. So everything went quiet then in 2015 until 2 years ago, when one of the members of the group that helps support the castle contacted Sue Manston of the BSS Help and Advice Group and said, "Do you know anyone who could make a replica of this dial?" And Sue contacted me, And I said, well, I know this dial. And things really got moving at that stage, because by then I had come across Severlot, and he'd made me this. Is that visible?
Yes, hold it closer to the screen, closer to your camera. Yes, that's visible. Yes.
That's a rather nice astrolabe, and it's actually a replica of the one that's in the Whipple Museum in Cambridge. So I knew Severlot has got really rather good abilities at both design and through his Master Terebrus people making things. So I introduced them. I'm going to put that down for a moment. And they did a deal. And the deal was that I would take the photographs of the original dial and take all the measurements, the key features, and then at that point I would hand everything over to Severlot, and he would turn it into brass, and that's exactly what he did. And at the end of the article, you can see what he actually achieved. And he'll talk about that later on. But in the meantime, I carried on investigating the maker of the dial, who'd signed it, luckily. And we found out that he hadn't made any other dials. John Doherty was his name, of Irish extraction, but he lived in England almost all his life and written a couple of books. So I wrote that up, and Severlot wrote up the dial itself, which is really a rather nice example, quite large and with lots of features. And it's waiting at the moment to be permanently installed at the castle, where everyone will be able to see it. The castle is open to the public, and the original is kept indoors safely with sufficient notes to be able to tell that it is actually a pretty accurate replica. So I think that's probably all I need to say, and I'll hand over back to the chairman. And
well, thank you very much, John. I have a couple of preliminary questions. The reproduction dial, which I see in the top right-hand corner, in that picture, it is just resting on the old pedestal. Is that right?
That's correct. It's exactly the same size, and it will pick up on the same mountings very closely anyway.
Right. By mountings, you mean the holes in the top of the stone?
That's right. They'll probably need to be enlarged a bit,
how will they be fixed? They won't be fixed in the original way.
That's between Severlot and the people at the castle.
Right.
But there are some special bolts, and it will be held in by resin, so it's fairly safe.
And I assume this photograph is taken in the real sun.
Yes, that's real. I'm not certain it's aligned, but one of the members of the castle staff actually took it on one of the very few days back in when was it? April, I think, when it was taken.
Yes, and I think you mentioned that it has an extraordinarily long polar-oriented gnomon and a very short vertical gnomon, probably not quite tall enough for high summer. Is that right?
That's right. Although you'll notice that the actual stereographic projection is quite a small percentage of the area of the dial.
Yes.
So that to some extent means that there's always enough of the vertical shadow on the bit of the scale that matters for you to be able to take a reading. But it's less than ideal. That's certainly true.
And it does look horribly vulnerable.
Oh yes, I mean the number of double horizontal dials that have got broken gnomons it must be over 50%, I should think.
Yes.
So the design is naturally rather vulnerable.
Yeah.
But it shows what's happened here in that the designer was an academic.
Yes.
He knew his stuff. He could do all the design work, but he'd never made a sundial before, and he certainly never made a double horizontal. So
Yes.
one of these practical features he didn't really find out just what the details were.
That's why we like to give our students a certain amount of practical experience so they can see what real life throws in the way of theory.
That's right.
Well, anybody got any questions for John at this stage about the as it were, the history? And we'll have several odd later on. But while John is still with us, anybody got any questions for him?
No raised hands and no chat messages so far.
It is an extremely elegant sundial. To my mind, all the space taken up around the outside is a little
John,
bit wasted.
could you please pronounce for me the correct ways to spell the customer and the maker's last names? When I was writing the Ukrainian version
yes, there you are,
of
John.
the article, you remember we exchanged quite a few letters trying to explain how to convert their names into Cyrillic spelling. Could you please
Pronounce. Yes, John, can you tell
pronounce them for me
I
the
would
way
say
you pronounce
Doughty.
them?
Is it
Sorry, what do you want me to say?
The last names of the maker,
Yes, you're breaking up, Severlot.
John Dougherty,
But the original maker
and the bishop, the customer.
the original maker was John Doughty Senior. In fact, he had a son of the same name. But Severlot's put a facsimile of his signature in the original place. But he's also put further down the name of Master Terebros and the year. I think it was 2023 when it was made. So there's no hiding the fact that this is a replica.
Oh,
It
yes.
could be here. Yeah, and this
But the pronunciation that Severlot.
In the southern part, near the bottom of the coat of arms, between the sun and the shield.
Yes.
Over here. Yeah.
Yes, we can see that. And the way I would pronounce the two critical names are John Dougherty and Hartlebury Castle. Is that what you would say, John?
That's what I would say, but I wouldn't necessarily say I'm right.
No, I'm afraid, Severlot, that even English people can't pronounce English names reliably. It's very complicated spelling that we have.
His son, John Dougherty, actually changed the spelling of his surname later on in life.
Try and be helpful.
I think to distinguish himself from his father.
Well, that makes sense. It was very common in those days for fathers and sons to have the same name.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think, Martins, we can move on to Article 2 at this stage. And, well, we've got some little fillers there. Although you can't see it very well, the bottom left-hand corner of the left-hand page, there is this extraordinary polar sundial designed by Fred Sawyer. And this very one, which you see in this photograph, was on show at the Peterborough conference, and it really does work. And if you like ingenious sundials, this is an extremely good example. On the other side of the same page, there is a classic Peter Ransom postcard type article, a little filler article, to fill the space at the end of that lead article. And I don't think there is much to say about it. This is a very obvious sundial with a sort of octagonal shape on a vertical wall. On the right-hand page, we have, well, part of my ploy, this is a joint article written by me and Ben Jones. Is Ben Jones signed in? Do we know, Martins?
I didn't see him. Let me check right now. No, unfortunately,
well,
no.
The motivation here was that I was simply asked to give a lecture, and I'll give an online Zoom talk to an organisation called the Art Friends Cambridge, an organisation I have to say I hadn't heard of, but somehow or other they managed to make money out of this talk, and sufficient money to lay on a 2-day lettering course on designing and making a sundial. And there you see the group outside what is actually a converted chapel, now used as a lettering workshop. and the guy who runs it, is not only makes the occasional sundial. He used to work for Cardozo Kindersley Workshop, but he, Eric Marland, now has this workshop, which he handed over to Ben Jones, our noted sundial making member. And most of the people in the photograph, apart from Eric, me, and Ben, are people on the course which he ran, which are very successful. And they hope to have another course. So maybe some of these people will be members of a society one day and be making sundials for others. But I think that's enough of that. If anybody has any questions, I'll certainly ask them, but I think that's probably enough. And then we move on to the next article, which is a very curious article by Karl-Heinz Schaldach about circular objects. It is possible that some of these are or were intended to be used if not as sundials, then at least for indicating event mark, you being used as an event marker or some such. This is actually one chapter of a much longer book, or an extract of one chapter from a longer book. No doubt the rest of the book is much more oriented towards sundials as we know them, but it was interesting to see these for completeness. If Ben is signed in, which I don't think he is, he might be able to add something. But otherwise, I think these are what we might simply call mystery objects, some of which may be sundials or may have been sundials.
I think, for example, the one in number 4 quite well corresponds to sundial of those canonical hours, possibly, which
yes.
are used.
How many lines are there?
Oh, okay. We should count. Quite many.
I think I have counted, but I've forgotten the answer.
It seems more than 24.
I think there are 24.
Okay. Yes, it seems so, yeah.
So
yep.
this could have been some sort of time indicating.
It could
dial.
be.
If it was a Norfolk, I mean, is that actually on a wall?
We
don't know, but that wasn't a horizontal sundial.
Yeah, there are some sundials of such sort directed.
Oh, but indeed there are. Yes. So that could have been a wall sundial. It could have been a horizontal sundial. Of course, it would be ideal as an equatorial dial, but I don't suppose that's how it was actually intended to be used. So, in short, there are a lot of sundials, a lot of objects in this article, very few of which are obviously sundials, if any, but they are mystery objects which are worth recording, let's put it like that. Well, then we have an article by Jackie Jones, who doesn't want to talk about this article, but I thought it was quite interesting. Those of us who went to the Peterborough conference, these were not on the sundial tour. They were there advertised as being free sundials on, or at least close to the cathedral. And we were invited to look at them in our own time. And I certainly had a look myself. Jackie is a bit scathing about what the dial which we see in Fig 2, the dial that's on the left-hand column in the middle, this one, and that's on the west front of the cathedral. This, of course, being on the west front, is a nearly direct west-facing sundial, if not actually direct west-facing. And I've always found the problem with west-facing and east-facing sundials is that, well, you end up we're looking at a lot of parallel lines, as in a school exercise book, really rather boring. And I think it's actually quite clever the way the designer here has actually made it look more like a real sundial, or at least the corner of a real sundial, when in fact those are all parallel or very nearly parallel lines. I actually thought this was quite a clever design. I will agree with Jackie that it is a bit faded. When you actually see it for real, you can only just make out the gold, which is unusual because normally when the sun is shining on gold leaf, you get quite strong reflections. But You can tell from that photograph, but it doesn't show up very well. The other sundials, well, were fairly ordinary, but I quite liked the direct west-facing dial. Well, then we have a few pages about the conference and the little talks which were there. Very delighted to speak about any of these that anybody has any questions about, if I can remember what happened, but there are only snippets there. After that, we go on to Irene Breitner's article. Now, this is about the Meredith Hughes sundials. I hope, indeed, I think that Irene is here, present. Are you there, Irene? Can you make sure she's unmuted, Martins?
Okay. Irene, you should unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, lovely. Well, it's really good to have you on. We haven't seen you for a little while, so splendid to have you here via this medium, if not for real. So please tell us what you had.
Well, I haven't anything to add, except that I'm delighted that the owner of the newly discovered Meredith Hughes sundial is also with us, Bernard, and I'm grateful to him for finding, buying, and telling us about his Meredith Hughes sundial, because I had only discovered 5 dials by Hughes, all very different, all very, well, all from the same area of North Wales. And I always hoped we might find another dial by him, or more than one. So I was delighted that Bernard had found this one. And we may yet find one in a churchyard or in a garden somewhere between, let's say, Bala and where? North Wales anyway. So, but I haven't anything much to add, but perhaps Bernard would like to introduce himself and tell us about his sundial. He has it set up in his garden in South Wales.
So is he on the participants list?
Yes,
all right,
I'm here.
cool.
I
If
confirm
you're bearing away. Yeah. Oh, splendid. Yes, thank you. So over to you.
Yes. Well, I saw this sundial at an auction, and it just struck me as interesting. It was described as English, and I didn't know exactly who it was. I came across Irene's article only in abstract. I wasn't a member of the society at the time. And as with auctions, you often don't have time to do that much research. But I decided to go for it and bought it. And then started to research it. It doesn't look like it's ever been outside. It's got a patina that looks rather like you see on architectural bronzes. There's no pitting. And I thought, well, who's it for? Can we trace it? And that has turned up a can of worms, because this crest that you see, well illustrated in the picture, is actually a Hughes crest. Now, obviously, it could be Meredith has used the family crest and made it for himself, or kept it as a demo. If you try tracing this crest via various means, it drops out as the family Hughes's work-class, which at the time was supposedly, according to the standard work, whose name just eludes me at the moment, genealogy, were supposedly in North Wales, obviously. But there's a fraudster potentially involved, and the claimant, who mentions Burke's peerage, has a concocted sort of lineage, I think, and this crest is claimed to link to someone who probably wasn't around actually at the time, and at the time probably didn't have the crest. So it's a bit of a mystery on that and needs a bit of further work. with regards to the maker, Meredith Hughes, he seems to have a different design for each sundial. He doesn't churn them out. They're not like ones associated with many makers. It's every one a bit different. And this one falls somewhere in the middle of complexity. It's not his most simple. It's not his most complex. They all have a motto, and the motto is all different. In this case, the motto is not shown in the picture. It's at the 12 o'clock position, and it's sic praeterat aetas, which means sort of thus passes an age, which is interesting. It's not a very common sundial motto, and it's a bit profound. I think that's really all, unless someone wants to. With regards to the Conway dial, I'm sorry to see this vandalised. I actually wanted a day out in North Wales. I come to North Wales often. In fact, I'm in Ruthin at the moment to see a daughter. And on that trip, we decided we'd go via Conway specifically to look at this dial, and this is what we discovered, which was a huge disappointment.
In a very sorry state.
Yes. It was actually, I'd done searches on Meredith Hughes dials, and when you come, and it wasn't listed although the society has attributed it to Meredith Hughes, and it was Meredith Hughes, it was just reported as a listed dial that was stolen. So if you put in stolen sundial Conway, it dropped out as a BBC news event. But it's a maker. I think that's about all I've got to say, unless questions and things, and questions to Irene, obviously.
Yeah, anybody got any questions? I'm most grateful to you for that. That certainly amplified what is written there as it stands. If not,
no raised hands, no chat messages, but yeah.
So let's move on to the next article, which is a very peculiar sundial.
Sorry, okay. It's here.
Yes, it says an unusual Belgian sundial. Unfortunately, Martin Jenkins is away on one of his many travels at the moment, so we won't have his company present. But maybe Jeff first, and others have had things to say about this. Jeff, would you like to say anything about this article?
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Yes.
I was intrigued by this. First of all, by the extraordinary accuracy claim for the instrument, and the difficulty that I anticipate in using it, because although the elevation of the sun is not changing very quickly most of the time, the azimuth is probably changing rather more rapidly, and you have to constantly change the azimuth of the apparatus to keep the image of the sun on the blade, which projects below the main bar of the instrument. And so you have to do this in the howling winds that blow around Belgium, in the hope that the clouds will not obscure the device at precisely the moment after noon at which you recorded the first reading before the noon. So you have to match the two times, and so it is time critical and therefore highly weather dependent. And I just think it must have been quite a challenge to get the sort of accuracies which there was claimed for the instrument. And really, that's about all I have to say about it.
And you eloquently express very much the same thoughts that I had when reading this article. It does seem extremely strange. One thing that it suggests in the article is that a third instrument is possibly extant. Well, somebody else wrote in, I can't find the message, saying that yes, not only is there a third instrument, but it is in a museum in France, and he has seen it. So there are at least 3 such instruments extant. I have to say, I cannot imagine why anybody would want to buy one of these. But it is undoubtedly a curiosity that one cannot deny. So, I myself, for other reasons, was very much taken by the bits about the carillon and the bells, and quietly lost interest in the sundial. But it's very interesting, but it should be recorded, and quite right that it should be in the pages of the bulletin. So I think, Martin, if there are no questions on that one, we can move on to the next article, which of course is recording the follow-up. I don't think we need to say anything about that. And then come to Christine's article on the Prince Albert Victor Sundial in Edinburgh. So here we are. Christine, can you say something about this?
Yes, this was originally intended to be just a short reader's letter as a follow-up to the article by Dennis Cowan in the December 2023 bulletin, which was entitled "Tack Tent O Time." That's a motto which is at the top of this particular sundial. But it turned out that the sundial was more interesting than it at first appeared, so the article got rather longer than a reader's letter. It's one of a small number of items that still remain from the 1886 exhibition in Edinburgh, but it's the only one that's still in the same place. The others either moved around or are in storage or something. It's not very satisfactory as a sundial. Could you go back to page 35? Because it's got an armillary sphere on the top, but it's much too small and it's much too high, as you can see from figure 3. Furthermore, the numerals are reversed, which is a bit peculiar. And in figure 1, which you can still see there, you can see it's really out of proportion with the rest of the object. It has actually, or did once have, 4 vertical dials. So if you go to the next page. That's right, figure 6 at the top of the right-hand page. Remains what remains of the 4 vertical dials as they were on the cardinal, facing the cardinal directions. Let's hope that there will be new dial plates made, but I haven't heard whether that's actually in progress yet. But to me, the most striking thing about the Prince Albert sundial is that it's composed of 8 different types of sandstone. No, could you go back to the previous page? That we're still on the sundial.
Mm-hmm.
And the courses are labelled with the names of the quarries from which they've come. The colours were apparently red, yellow, and blue, and they're probably originally much more obvious than they are now. Another feature that of interest are the mason's marks, which you can see on the bottom right-hand side. Anyway, all this was connected to the fact that the sundial was designed by James Gowans, who was a prominent Edinburgh architect whose speciality was using stones of contrasting colours in his buildings. And then we can go on to the next page, because perhaps of more interest, although not the sundial itself, were these 2 pillars which stood on either side of a nearby road. They were connected with the exhibition as well. They have actually moved a few feet, so they're not in the same position as originally. Though they Oh yes, our chairman likened them to geological columns, which I think is quite a good description. The figure 10 shows the one on the one that was erected by the Edinburgh and Leith Master Builders Association, and the one on the right was erected by the Edinburgh Operative Masons. They were both designed by James Gowans, but a huge number of people were involved. For example, the stones were contributed by 15 different quarry masters. They're topped by unicorns, which is the Scottish national animal. Again, the blocks are labelled with the quarry names, and there are masons' marks. There's a variety of finishes. This is unlike the sundial itself, to display the mason's skills. Apparently different ones on each course. These include scrabbled, fluted, polished, stugged, broached, chisel striped and tooled. As you can see, particularly on the left-hand picture, yes, thank you, exactly there. There are different amounts of weathering of the blocks, particularly the red sandstone. And it's tempting to think that the pillars were designed as part of an investigation into the comparative properties of the different sandstones. That's all I have to say about that. But I would say finally that although I made a bit of fun of the descriptions in Gatti, I'm sorry I was a bit hard on it, but I hope no fans of Mrs. Gatti were offended by it. It's a hugely impressive work. Thank you.
Anybody got any questions for Christine about this article? I have to say it fascinated me considerably, not really about the sundial, but certainly about these columns. If you ever consider...
Could you say a few more words about the Masons' signs? What's their general origin? Did they have a particular meaning?
The question was about those Masons
Yes,
signs, whether somebody has any explanation of the origins, or are they standardized in somehow?
Well, each Mason would have had his own mark, and so would use the same mark on all his work. So that's how they could identify who did what.
Yes, this was common in the different trades.
Were they inherited by their heirs? Or did they use their personal?
So a given workshop would have a sign, and sometimes different individuals within the workshop would have a sign, but you get marks not just on stone, but on iron castings and bell castings. They have marks on them, not quite like those, but it's very much the same idea. And so that if you have the right sort of reference work, you can tell who made a particular object just by checking on the mason's marks. Certainly stone buildings in England.
On Peterborough Cathedral, I noticed inside the East End.
Yes, if you come into old churches old stone buildings in England, you will often see these either high up, can be in very peculiar places. And these are identification marks. Now, there are other sorts of mason's marks which are put on stone, so that when the stones are hauled into position, they know which stone to put in which place. But these are quite different. These are identifying individual masons, I think.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Well, I think I have a tailpiece to say about this. So, Martins, if you can unshare your screen and I can share mine. I think that's right. Yes, that's where we got to. Right. Well, related to Christine's article, I thought I would show you what seems a completely irrelevant photograph. Take a look at this. You can see here, very obviously, a picture of a mother with her newborn baby, and countless millions of such photographs have been produced over the years. This happens to be rather an early one. This dates from 1864, and the mother in this photograph was exceptionally well connected. Her father was King of Denmark, and she had two brothers, both of whom became kings. One succeeded her father when he died and became the next king of Denmark, and the other brother became king of Greece. Now, not to be outdone, she herself married well. She was, being Danish, she was entitled Princess Alexandra of Denmark, and she married Prince Albert Edward of Wales, the eldest son of Queen Victoria. So her mother-in-law was Queen Victoria, and her husband, Albert Edward, later became King Edward VII, when she became Queen of the United Kingdom and indeed Empress of India. And if we look at the child being the bit was her, not only her firstborn child, the child was a boy, and being the first son of the heir to the throne, he immediately became, the baby became second in line to the throne. And this baby is, of course, Prince Albert Victor, after whom the sundial in Christine's article was named. Unfortunately, Prince Albert Victor died at the age of 28, so he didn't succeed to the throne. Queen Victoria was still around, and after he died, his father became king, but Prince Albert Victor was by then dead. He died in a flu epidemic in the 1890s. And I've been looking about this flu epidemic. There is recent research suggests that it actually wasn't influenza at all. It was actually quite possibly a very early example of coronavirus or COVID. So maybe we're looking at a baby who later died of COVID. Who knows? You might as well see a family tree to put it all in perspective. I've highlighted in red Princess Alexandra, married to Edward VII eventually, and Albert Victor, the baby in the picture, and with Victoria at the top. Now, Albert Victor, before he died, he was engaged to Mary of Teck, and they were about to get married. So very sadly, he died not long before the wedding. And Mary was then, of course, having lost her husband or husband-to-be, and then turned her attention to the next son along, and that's George V. And she married George V, who didn't die prematurely and came to the throne after Edward VII died in 1910. And of course, they had two sons who became kings, Edward VIII and George VI. And this takes us up, not quite to the present day, where you can see Elizabeth II. Now, you all know what happens after Elizabeth II, so I won't go into that level of detail. But having told you what happened to Alexandra's, as it were, her British relations, you might be wondering what happened to her Danish and indeed Greek relations. Well, as it happens, I've met two of them. So I thought I would finish with this rather intriguing photograph. I'm on the left, back to the camera, talking to two ladies. And the elderly lady that I'm talking to was the widow of the King of Denmark, more recent King of Denmark, and she styles herself Queen Ingrid of Denmark. So the Danish royal family is still very much going. The younger lady on the right is Queen Ingrid's daughter. She too married well. She is the widow of the last king of Greece, and she styles herself Queen Anne-Marie of Greece. This is an interesting example of a not very well-known maxim that you can wait years to meet a queen and then suddenly you meet two at once. For completeness, I should note that the other guy in the photograph was at the time Master of Churchill College, Cambridge, and he was later Vice Chancellor, and he had a sundial in his garden, which was the wrong way round. So it was a very extraordinary garden party, which I was invited to, where we had he and me with screwdrivers trying to turn his dial plate so that no one pointed north rather than south. He is now Lord Brewers, one of just 20 members of the House of Lords with a science or engineering degree. Well, that's quite enough for me. I will now hand over to Vsevolod Burovchenko, our star guest, and I will now unshare my
Frank,
screen.
we have one raised hand. Thomas.
Oh, we have one raised hand. Okay, let's go back. A raised hand. Yes, what's your question?
Thomas, please.
Frank, in the photo, you suggested that child might be a newborn, and I think that it's very unlikely. The kid looks a lot older than a newborn.
Well, it's dated 1864, which was when he was born. I have to say, I agree. I also strongly suspect that this is not a photograph. It's actually a painting. And this is a bit of artistic impression there. The problem is, try as I can, I've looked up the copyright on this. This is from, of course, from Wikipedia, who are happy for this to be published on the Wiki Commons license copyright. But if you look at the right-hand side of the picture, can you see these two loops? Signs of two loops. There's something here which I don't believe would be in a painting. It's just, if you're going to have a painting, it's almost as though something stray has got into a photograph. So there are some unanswered questions. The baby looks too old to be newborn. That could be. But this baby to me looks 2 or 3 months old. And it could have been taken then, I don't know. Very hard to say, but it's certainly shall we say, a young prince, if not a newborn prince.
But at least for me, it looks like a photograph.
You think it looks like a photograph? I think it looks like a photograph. The very small print, when you look at the Wiki Commons license, says this photograph is deemed to be publishable because it is a reproduction of an artwork. But of course, it doesn't say whether the artwork was a photograph or a painting. It's very cryptic, and I really don't know. So if somebody can find out the origin of this photograph, I've checked all the obvious art galleries in Britain and Denmark and failed to find them. Incidentally, when I was talking to these two queens, who were, of course, both Danish, born Danish, well, actually, Queen Ingrid was born Swedish, but she became Danish later on. They both knew about a sundial, which is now in a museum, that was once on a church in Copenhagen, which burnt down in about 1780, and is very like the sundial at Queen's College, Cambridge. We have no direct evidence that it's been copied by Queen's. It dates, the sundial in question dates from before the sundial at Queen's, so we don't know. Enough from me. I will unshare. Any other questions, Martins? No.
No other questions.
I will
While we are switching between speakers, just I want to remind that I posted in the chat a link to our survey. There are just 2 questions, so you can spend some 2 minutes and post some responses. So I hope it will help us to improve the contents of what we are discussing here. Okay.
Right, Vsevolod, over to you, please. You can share your screen, and we will pay attention to what you have to say.
Vsevolod, you are muted if you're telling something.
I can still see his cat.
I'm trying to turn
Yes, we see
on
the cat.
the camera, but if I want, probably it won't be that important. I'll be showing the slides anyway. So, hello, Martins. Hello, Frank. Hello, John. Hello, everyone. I was asked to give a speech about the history of Master Trevor's project. Yes, well, sorry, I need to am I allowed to share my screen?
Yes, yes.
Yes, you should be allowed to share. Yeah.
Yes,
Yes, we got it.
you must be seeing the front page. Yes,
Yeah.
a few words about myself. I am from Kiev, from Ukraine. By primary my occupation, I'm an architect, a specialist in energy efficiency. That's a job which includes a lot of calculations using different software, different instruments, and also includes such considering such factors as influence of solar energy in rays coming from the sun, considering movements of the sun, which has a lot of common with the design of sundials. So which led me to the next my interest, next my hobby, design of sundials, which I combined for some time with my interest in history, particularly history of Ukraine, of Eastern Europe. And about a decade ago, I was invited to take part in a living history project, recreation of a historical vessel. We built it for a few years based on a number of sources. We made a number of trips up and down the Dnieper River, where everyone contributed according to their skills, using tools. So we use historical tools, and it was my idea to contribute to the project not only in physical work, but also produce instruments that we could have used to plan our time in our travels, particularly the portable sundial. So I started watching for those available sources to the partners who could join me in the project. And when I found the proper a few craftsmen who are ready to join me, we didn't, of course, stop on the first. So we started trying making other types of instruments, not only sundials. First, based on the photos from the open sources, from the museum websites. I think you might know quite a few of these devices. Original, they are from museums in Great Britain. And then we found interesting customers who helped us get the information, send us photos, helped us translate it for us pieces of literature in foreign languages, so which resulted in a number of very interesting projects of recreations of sundials, astrolabes, and other historical scientific tools. Like this, in 2019, we visited Malta. We managed to become friends with employees of the American Museum. They provided us photos of the interesting sundial and star dial. We from the hidden side, and we made a replica which could be used. So we had a number of customers who liked to try it not only study not only by photos, but try it actually in their hands. Also, like this astrolabe, we've seen it just half an hour ago. Our guest John Davis has shown the astrolabe with the camera. It was recreated in 2020 with the help of John Davis, who provided, who helped to decipher some of information, and a historian from Cambridge, Seb. I'm not sure if he's present today, And here's a very interesting photo. Our replica standing together with the original artifact. And here you can see some specific of our creations. Of course, we can't recreate the hue of a particular alloy. It's hard to find the metal which would have which would match perfectly composition of original alloy. We can't recreate completely original techniques of hand engraved devices. We use partially more modern technologies. And the most important, the devices we make are adapted for practical use. Like pointers in the astrolabe are somewhat shifted to match the positions of the stars in 21st century. So my initial aspiration was to design instruments that could have been actually used in the travels to solve practical problems, to demonstrate them. So of course all our recreations are somewhat different from the original artifact. The older is the artifact, of course there will be more difference with one designed for use nowadays. There was another interesting case of work with the Museum of Merton College in Oxford, where we were provided with the photos of an interesting Volvel's sundial of 14th century. And of course, we can't recreate all the specific of unique original artifact like this one that stayed in use for 2 centuries, that underwent a number of upgrades, and we had to choose one stage of its existence, so we opted to make it like it looked when it was new. And it was also a very interesting project. And there are cases of our collaborations with interactive museums, like the one in Plymouth in USA, and the Gallon, which Golden Hind, which is stationed, as far as I know now, in London in Thames. We produced for them a number of instruments like this ship compass. And I like very much getting photos of our instruments, not just standing on the shelf, but actually used in demonstrations, in living history events, been shown, been used, demonstrated, and used to tell people, to show how they have been operated. And we've recreated not only instruments from abroad in Lviv Historical Museum. There is a very interesting rare type of compass sundial made for Crown Chancellor of Polish Kingdom, which included at the time larger territory of Ukraine, produced by Jesuit professor. So we've studied it, and in 2021 we've recreated a replica, a few replicas for particular customers, somewhat altered for their particular personas. And the results of our study and reproduction were published in Ukrainian Historical Museum, STRI, in the historical costume, and in British Sundial Society Bulletin in 2022. I think if you are interested, you can find that particular issue. And in 2022, a lot of our plans were broken, with a certain state trying to recreate former glory of the empire. So we had to stop our work for a few months. I spent a lot of time in rather unpleasant way in sitting watching in basement our building. A lot of communications were broken. The building of the factory where we've been ordering etching of the metal for our works was damaged by a missile strike. But I tried to be useful, so I helped with camouflage nets, digging trenches at the outskirts of Kiev. But we managed to restore our work. My partner still works with me, though some of our subcontractors joined the army, so we are somewhat limited with the technologies we can use. So we're searching for new subcontractors. So there is a lot of improvisations. There are shortages with some of materials. There are certain improvisations, but we are working, performing orders, and the money we got from the orders was we use actively to help our friends who are now in Ukrainian army. So in these 2 years, money earned from Master Service project was used to buy a number of tools, cameras, stoves, batteries, chainsaws, and other instruments that people need. You know, they're short on literally everything. This particular photo in the lower part, this searchlight is very recent. It was made just a week ago for a unit of National Guard stationed near Kiev in the defense of Kiev. Actually. So when our friend John Davis proposed me to join a project of recreation of the Sundial for Hartlebury Castle, I was interested, and not only for financial reasons, but for financial reasons too. It was a very interesting project. It resulted in 2 articles, the one published in British and the Society Bulletin, and another is being prepared for the one in our university in Kiev. It was a project where we've got a lot of really interesting experience. I hope I'll be able to use this experience in other projects. I won't be retelling the material of the whole article. You'll be able to read it. But I just want to say a few points outside the bulk of information in the article. You've seen already the central part of the sundial is a stereographic projection, and this part is actually rather familiar for me. I've said already, my principal work is energy efficiency consulting, and the stereographic projection known here as solar map is one of instruments prescribed in Ukrainian building codes to check the duration of installation of room and other spaces. There are building code that prescribe necessary time of installation, and of course it's not a kind of instrument that young architects opt to use nowadays. They prefer to use this software, which gives you the answer immediately. But you know, when there are conflicting interests, like the owner of one building and owner of another building, and you need to present the experts the calculation with some analog tools which can be checked step by step if there is no falsification. So such tools are still actually used sometimes nowadays. And interesting in the point of our work was it's rather a small part of the whole of the whole plate in the eastern and south and western parts of the sundial. In the morning and evening parts of the paths of the sun, there are scales for the Julian calendar. And it was a kind of obstacle for me how to fill those scales, because using modern astronomical data would not match the data built by Julian calendar in 18th century. And which table to use? When I found later, there are actually some sundials, the one produced in 17th century by Henry Sutton's workshop in London, so we could have used it, but I didn't know at that moment. And John Davis let me do it a rather hard way. He didn't interfere at that moment. So the best my solution I could find was using the 16th century pilot in manual by Breton pilot Guillaume Bruscon with the tables of solar declination for the astrolabes. So we use that table considering the precession into centuries. It was a rather long way to fill the scale, which occupies a rather small part of the whole plate. The article tells about the way the bars of metal turned, after all, into the dial. There was also a question, an issue, how to attach the plate of the sundial to the marble, to the stone pedestal. Because there was an attempt to steal the original one. The heads of original screws were cut off, so we need to find a solution which couldn't be stolen in the same way. There are pits under the plate of the dial, which are filled with lead, and probably the anchor bolts or the cutting bolts were turned into the yet molten lead when it was still liquid. So our solution, our proposal, was to fill them now with to extract the remains of the lead, to fill them with resin, and to plunge the bolts, so the screws from our underside into that resin. But it's at the moment it's only the proposal. The final word will belong to the builders, to the workers who will install it. So they will have to make that decision. I'll try to show you a video of the first assembly. If it doesn't, I'll switch to the. I'll show you the first video how the dial was assembled. We wanted to produce the GNOME with machine milling, but the expected subcontractor couldn't do it for us, so it was produced by purely manual way in the workshop of my partner. Here we recorded a small video of his work, so you can see the conditions, how he assembles the instruments. Yes, you see a small Sundial quadrant and the parts of a few astrolabes in the back part. And that's the way the finished Sundial looks like when it was assembled in November of 2023. It was a very interesting, very challenging project for a number of reasons, but the one that brought us a lot of experience. And I hope when it will be installed in the park of Hartford Castle, the guides will be able to tell decently to the tourists if they will be interested. Maybe they'll make some particular guided tours telling about scientific background of the bishop and his friends and the instruments in the collection of the Castle Museum, and probably and also say a few words about the parts of this Sundial, about the meaning of the scales, about the way science came to develop all these solutions, because there is really what to tell, because many important personalities in the history of the science contributed to development of Sundial, and there is what to tell. So here you can see in the same room the original Sundial and our replica. You can see that our replica, of course, it's not an ideal 100%. It's not a copy. It's not a photocopy. We made the drawing. We had to restore some parts by analogs because the original plate was rather eroded from almost 3 centuries under the open sky, under the elements. And I hope it will be installed and they will be able to show it to their guests, to the tourists. You can learn more about our projects on my Facebook blog, on my page, WordPress page, on our shop. And if I have a minute more, I wanted to say that I am now gathering funds to help my friend who serves in a medical unit to restore his ambulance van. We helped it restore in 2022, but it needs to be repaired again. It has an engine wrecked. So if you can spare a bit, I know we have all have rather limited opportunities, but if you want to help directly or buying something from our store, you know, it will help. Thank you for your attention. Thank you in advance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very
now,
much.
Now raised hands and
If you
no
can,
chat comments.
So
Possibly I could ask one
if
question.
you have questions for me, I'll be glad to answer them.
Yeah. I see that you're using chemical etching for all fine lines and the digits and
Yes, Martins.
and then you apply also dark color, black color, possibly in those etched lines. And
in some yes, a few photos back there is a photo of the brass plate with attached printed template and the way the dial plate looks after being etched. After all, the resultant dial it doesn't look exactly like it's engraved, because all the lines have the same depth, and in engraved the dials, the different curves have different depth, different profile, depending on the type of chisel they used, on the strength applied, and that's the aspect we can't replicate.
I'm interested from the practical side. From your experience, what happens with such dial plate under real weather conditions after 3, 5, 10 years? Because there are certain processes that would fade away the color, and then
yes,
there could be some
yes, I understand your
chemical process going on, and so how it looks like after a certain
I
time.
understand your concerns. The die is temporary. It was mostly for the presentation moment, and I think the die will wear off and the metal will be turning green within a few years, so it will be looking more like the original.
And how deep are those etchings? So how easy it would be to read those engravings?
Well, the original devices were engraved, and they were still, and we can still read most of the inscriptions after a few centuries.
Oh, okay.
So they want to be black in yellow. They will be somewhat different, but I think that it will be possible to read them.
Okay, yeah, that's quite interesting. So there's one comment from Alexei Pace. I think Alexei is from Malta, if I'm not wrong. So he's saying, "Hi, Vsevolod, nice presentation. I'm from Malta. I am also architect. You did a great replica of the nocturnal form of Maritime Museum. Sorry, I do not have a microphone on this PC." Okay. So your works are known. So any other comments or questions?
I want to switch and read the chat. Could you let me? So it's very pleasant to see I guess from Malta. I understand you've recognized the device from the first floor of the museum. It's shown usually only from with one side, and yes, you can see both sides. And I'd say that the side that stands to the wall, I'll try to show it once more. The side this with the triangle dial that stands to the wall, so it's impossible to see it normally. From geometrical point of view, it's even more interesting than the star dial that stands normally to the viewer. And I need to say that from my experience of use, that's the way it's assembled. Now it's assembled in slightly wrong way, that the trefoil shaped nut needs to stand to the side of the star dial, because when you use it with a plumb line, the nut can interfere with the plumb line, with the cord. So such pieces of practical experience are very interesting from my point of view.
Yes, Sevalod, you made a comment about the stereographic projection being used by architects. And that's certainly true in England, particularly for talking about how much light a window will get. And you can hold your stereographic projection outside the window, and you can tell different times of year how many hours of sunshine you're going to get through that window. So we're using the same system. Yes, just like this.
Yes, it's an instrument that can be applied not only for time telling, but also for other practical matters in design of buildings, to check whether the designed building will obstruct the installation of the existing buildings, whether it will interfere with the rights for natural installation. And these results of calculations have been used more than once in arguments between different sides.
Yes. Well, thank you very much for all your hard work in producing these instruments and in giving this presentation. It is very nice to have somebody else give the postscript rather than myself. If you can unshare your screen, we can go back to the main screen. And I don't know whether you can see the picture. And I have here one of Sevalod's instruments, Master Terebrus. And this is a Roman portable sundial, which I'm very pleased with. I used it today, and it really works. It works better in summer than in winter because the altitude changes more significantly than it does in the wintertime. But I think I can read these lines very easily. It is just like the, only a smaller, of course, just like the instrument at Haselbury Castle, in that it has chemical etching and black infills, and I find it very readable. So I'm very pleased to have this, and thank you very much for making it. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we can.
Yes, Frank, I'm glad to see the device. I'm glad to see it's in good order.
Yes, it is. It's in very good order, and I enjoy it very much. I use it quite often, and
glad to see you
it's a very nice thing because I can just take it outside my front door when the sun is shining and check that it really does work as it was intended to work. So thank you, everybody. And the September bulletin will be the next one issued, I hope, quite early in September. And then in October, we will have our next meeting. And I hope somebody else will give the presentation at the end. So thank you, everybody. If no more questions, I think we can sign out.